Hey everyone, what is happening? You are listening to The Brown Perspective. This is RO and I'm here with Eduardo. Hey man.
How's it going?
Good, good. Talk this week about Dave Chappelle. His new special, The Closer, came out.
The closer. Man,
Yeah.
he never stops getting in the middle of controversy, does he now?
No, he doesn't. And this one is just picks up right where he left off in the previous one. And this is his fifth one now with Netflix, if I'm correct. What he was trying to do is trying to wrap it up and just close it, and he picks up right where he left off with the controversy with the Sticks and Stones special, where he got a lot of pushback from the transgender community, LGBT community. And obviously that wasn't the only time, but I think especially after Sticks and Stones, so this picks up there. And
Hmm.
so what you've heard in the last week or so is a lot of criticism hurled his way, and a lot of criticism from the LGBT community and from the more liberal media that he's transphobic, that he's not helping, that he's punching down. And what's interesting is that it's a lot of conservatives. It's Fox News, is Ben Shapiro, it's all these other conservatives that are coming out, and I don't know if all of a sudden they realize that they like Chappelle, or is it just they're jumping on the bandwagon because he's being attacked by the transgender and LGBT community.
A lot of what he says is provocative, right? And part of it is trying to understand whether he's saying those things just to highlight some the racialization within those issues within the community. I know that one of the jokes or one of the things that he talks about is how, you know, um, the difference between someone who is gay and black and someone who's gay and white, and sort of that the whole relationship, or the fact that they can quote unquote sort of go back to being white if they feel threatened.
Yeah, he's
So
asking. Yeah, he's asking some tough questions, and what you hear back from the criticism that you hear about Chappelle, they're not really focusing on that. They're just focusing on what they perceive to be transphobia. There's very little discussion in terms of the deeper conversation that Chappelle wants to have around that. And so that part is disappointing. I wish there was more discussion on that. And by the way, a lot of the things that we're going to be discussing today were covered in this great article in The Atlantic by Helen Lewis. So I definitely recommend for people to read it if you get a chance.
I guess the let's start with the fact that I guess he knew that what he was gonna say was going to be controversial, that he was going to take some time off. And to your point, he did talk about how this might be the last time we see him for a
For
while.
a
So
while, yes.
part of me is like was wondering, okay, is it just because he is in the point where he needs to kind of disconnect and refresh, or is it because he knew that things were going to get that he was going to get a lot of heat for it, and that he may not have the opportunity or the platform to, or maybe he did not want to go back and continue to I guess work on this special or additional specials with Netflix, or maybe anticipating that Netflix would not want to work with him anymore because of the comments that he's made.
So far, Netflix is standing by him, and he did say towards the end of the special that this is the last time that he's going to joke about the LGBT community. He's saying, I'm not going to say another joke about your community unless we both agree that we're both laughing together. So he could be taking some time off to then reassess what he wants to focus on next with this comedy, because he's been poking fun or pushing onto what he perceives to be this culture of trying to suppress speech and comedians and cancellation. And so that might just be him trying to, again, move on beyond this. Because, again, with these Netflix specials, he did focus a lot on social commentary, especially social commentary around marginalized groups. But, one thing that I wanted to say earlier when it comes to Chappelle, that sure, he's being controversial, but when hasn't he been controversial? If you go back to his career over 20 years ago, this is the guy that the skit with Charlie Murphy, where I don't know if you remember, one of the most memorable lines is when Rick James tells a woman, bitch, come over here and have sex with Charlie Murphy, right? That complete degradation of women to reduce them to an object to pleasure a man. And that's not the only thing. There's remember Tyrone Biggums in the Chappelle show. He actually made fun of Mexicans too. He made a lot of and a lot of stereotypical jokes about Mexicans. So all of those things were offensive. All of those things could have been interpreted as hurtful. I don't. When it comes to the jokes that he makes about the LGBT community, I think that they're in that same vein. That's just his type of comedy. I think that the huge difference here is that we need to get into this whole punching up or not beating down on what we think are already marginalized, victimized communities. And even within there, it gets kind of tricky because he makes a lot of jokes about police shooting black people, and obviously he's black, so he gets a pass in that. But he calls women bitches all the time. He talks about poor white trash. He talks about right. He makes fun of so many different categories of people. Yet you can make the claim that white women as a group, they're powerful enough that they should be okay to handle his comedy, but not the transgender, because they have the highest suicide rate. They are victimized left and right. They already have so much baggage going against them. Maybe he shouldn't be joking about them. But then what about Caitlyn Jenner? Okay, wealthy white man that decides to become a woman. Is she fair game? Because there's a lot of privilege that she had. When we talk about not making jokes about the LGBT community, do we want to start parsing it that way, saying, well, they're victimized, but not all of them. Like if you're black and LGBT, then you have more baggage than if you're white and wealthy and LGBT. So maybe white and wealthy is okay, but black is not, right? You get into these conversations, even with Chappelle, right? Chappelle is at this point is a millionaire. Is it okay for a black millionaire to be telling these jokes? Is he still connected to his roots when he came out of like a working class neighborhood? Right? Do we still give him a pass, or do we now say because he's a millionaire, does he not get to make these jokes?
Yeah, I mean, now he's in a position of privilege, right? He's a millionaire, and now he starts the closer with that, and as a way to say like, okay, you can't mess with me because I have money and I can say these things now. So in some ways, perhaps he said that statement as a way to say, now I'm financially independent, so I don't depend on this deal with Netflix or anybody else. So I'm able to speak my mind. At least that's how that statement came across. But just because you have the independence, to your point, doesn't mean that you can go ahead and make those statements and still not be held accountable.
Well, he gets a pass in a lot of his jokes for being black, for being from a community that has historically been victimized. But he's no longer in that category in some sense. He's super wealthy. There's so much privilege that he has now. Does he still get a pass for all of these jokes? As if he was somebody that came out of the hood, that lived that experience, and that is still living it. Look, I think the answer is yes. I think so. But I think these are like the questions these are the things that I wish more people would be talking about, instead of just coming out and outright labeling him transphobic. I don't think he's transphobic. That's not the message that I get across from what he's saying. He's insensitive. He's rude. Some of his jokes may not even be that funny, but I don't think you can elevate that to the level of transphobia, where he's out there trying to encourage people to kill and to discriminate against transphobic people.
Well, but I think that's where the problem lies, because I think in some ways, just by, even if that's not his intent, and we know that maybe he himself is not going to do that, it's just part of his onstage persona, right, and the way that he tries to push buttons. But the fact that he talks about, and the way he talks about it, right? The way he talked about Asians, the way he talked about trans people or gay people, the way he talked about women, like, yes, he may be seeing that as a joke, but because he is a rich black man now who has an amazing platform, like some people may just, as and I think this is one of the reasons that he quit, and he mentions this too, like walking away from those $50 million. But I think just in the way that he thought that maybe some of the folks at Comedy Central were laughing at his jokes for the wrong reasons. This could happen too with these jokes, right? Like could be like, oh yeah, that's so true. What he's saying? Why is this? So like what he's saying, even if he doesn't intend it that way, or he has a more nuanced perception of the issue, some in his audience may not, and may just kind of reinforce some of those that line of thinking that is not that's
Right.
not appropriate. It's not helpful in this moment in time.
Right. So he's giving fodder to the homophobic, transphobic people.
Yes.
But he's always done that when it comes to his jokes about the black community, then, right? Or when it comes to his joke about women. He could have been giving fodder for the anti-woman crowd out there, the men that hate women, sexist men,
Yeah.
right? So he's always been doing this. I think the question is, are we saying then that he doesn't get to do this to the LGBT community because they're a victimized group? Is that really what it comes down to? Because everybody seems to be okay with him when he's doing it to black people or to women or to Mexicans or to some of his jokes on Asians. But for the most part, most of his comedy in the last 20 years, up until say the last 3 or 4 years, when he started focusing on what people call cancel culture, most of that comedy was directed against white people, against black people. So he's always been given fodder to groups of people that already have an inclination to be racist or to even hate white people. So are we saying that he just doesn't get to make jokes about the transgender community? I suppose that's really the question.
It's an important question, and I did not see the end of the special. But if you say that he made it seem like he is at a point where he's not gonna continue to make jokes until they get to a better place. And I think what's hard about it is because that it's also, the LGBTQ identity is one that is intersectional, right? So you can be of any ethnicity, and I
Mm.
know there's been a lot of gay and lesbian African Americans or blacks who feel attacked by it, right? So they're laughing at the stuff that he's saying about the black identity, but maybe not so much because some of it is can kind of feel not good. But then you add the additional lens of gender identity, in some ways, kind of like, and I think in some ways he is, as a straight male, trying to to say, oh wow, now I can talk about this, right? You can make fun of this because you get in trouble. And in some realities, in some sense, it's true because now we know more about how hurtful it is, and how challenging it is for folks who find themselves in those positions.
He also made jokes about mm, priests molesting children, so that's very insensitive too.
Well,
And
yeah, apparently he was molested himself.
well, that's what he said. We don't know if that's true or not. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that most of his comedy, depending on how you look at it, you could say that it's hilarious and he's a genius, or you could just say that he's just very hurtful and he punches down on other people, and only when he talks about white people that's when he's punching up. And I suppose the part that I'm trying to wrap my head around is how do you know where that line is drawn, where you get to say, yeah, we feel like it's okay to not give Chappelle a platform because he crossed this line, because nobody seemed to care that he was pushing those boundaries before, at least not as much. But now he seems like he's gone beyond the threshold that we all, or like most of the culture seems to be saying, at least most of the mainstream media seems to be saying, yeah, we don't like this, and we don't want to give him a platform. And so again, and it's also, is that reflective of the entire country, or is it just like a liberal media specific segment of that? Because let's just say hypothetically that all of his jokes about the LGBT community were directed at Caitlyn Jenner, privileged white individual with a lot of things, a lot of benefits in this society, who all of a sudden decided to become a woman and change his identity also. If all of his jokes were directed at people just like her, at wealthy gay guys, people that apart from them being in the LGBT community have all of the privileges of all of the white privileges that we associate with this country, do you think people would be a little bit more willing to tolerate his comedy, or do you think it would be the same outrage?
I think we'll probably be more tolerated just because I think yeah, to your point, is it's someone who's privileged, but maybe not. And at the same time, we know that Jenner got into hot water herself for not being as vocal or supportive when she was running for governor, and in terms of speaking out about transgender issues during the campaign.
I'm always trying to see where that boundary is, and the truth is it doesn't really exist, or it does exist, but it's very murky. It's probably not even a boundary. It's just a whole spectrum, because
you know it when you cross it.
Yeah, I suppose
I think he just decided to cross it all the way to,
yeah,
I guess, to make a point.
Yeah, because he came out firing at a lot of different areas where people, a lot of pain points or areas of sensitivity that are likely to trigger people. And then he moved on to the LGBT community. But maybe that's the point that he was trying to prove, that all of the other groups that he offended in the beginning, it's only when he moves to the LGBT community where everybody seems to say that's where we draw the line. And maybe that's okay, right? Maybe if we agree as a society that that's the group that we want to protect, then if collectively we agree that that's the case, then we've decided that that's the boundary. But I don't know if that really is well, I suppose that could happen. But remember when he used to get in trouble a lot with also in the black community, because he wouldn't stop saying the N-word. Remember that?
And he hasn't stopped.
But back then, nobody jumped and supported the black community when they were trying to at least get him to stop saying this. So it seems like collectively as a society, we made the decision that we're okay with that. But I think now we're having that discussion as to, again, with Chappelle, are we okay with the jokes that he makes about the LGBT community? And I think, well, if we're going to say that maybe if the jokes were targeted at wealthy, powerful individuals that get all the privileges of being white, but they just happen to be also in the LGBT community, then we kind of just push that boundary a little bit more to the right and saying, well, maybe we're really just talking about those that are truly, truly marginalized, that have we're going to do a scale. We're going to say, okay, you need to have these 10 things going against you, and therefore you're a protected group. But if you have only 5 things that were against you, but you grew up as a white privileged male and you had all these privileges, and you actually, if you choose to, you can still tap into this network of powerful people to come to your defense, then maybe we're not as sympathetic to your plight, right? When you start, it kind of starts getting messy when you get into that space, because he's not going to come out there and say, hey, I'm about to tell you a joke about an LGBT person, but here are the reasons why I think it's okay for me to say this joke, because this person has all these privileges and only these disadvantages, so I think they can handle a joke, right? No one's going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of defeats the joke, but I think but I think he certainly focuses on race, and then, because it's true, I mean, part of the issue is that even if you're a wealthy, gay, black, Latino, Asian person, there's still oppression. I mean, the numbers of people who fall in that category is very, very minimal, or not as many. Let's say the majority of other folks are, folks who are really struggling, and transgender people, even when they're white, facing assault and being beat up and all those things. So I think there's a level of, yes, while there may be some folks who very are living privilege, are able to live their identity in privilege, and maybe some of the folks that maybe there's a little bit more representation and more liberal industries, like like filmmaking and things like that are sort of a little bit ahead of the curve. There's still a lot of people who are getting discriminated against, and again, whether they're gay, whether they're black, whether they're Asian. So I think in some ways he's almost like, to your point, he's kind of putting this is still happening across these communities, but for some reason, there seems to be a little bit more outrage when you cross this line versus that line, and maybe that's something to be that we need to reflect on. Like, we should be just as outraged when he makes a joke about a poor black person as he does when he makes a joke about a transgender individual. Consistency, RO, consistency.
Yeah, well, if we're talking about consistency, then if we're going to say, as you mentioned, that somebody with all the privileges is still subject to a lot of discrimination and hate and potential violence once they come out as LGBT, yeah, that is true. But if we're going to say that, then we can't say that because Chappelle is now a millionaire, that puts him in a different category. Because we've just established that if you're white and you have privilege, that doesn't take away from the fact that you suffer from discrimination and potential threat to your life because you're LGBT. Same thing with Chappelle. Just because he's a millionaire doesn't make him stop being black, and still subjected to abuse and racism in parts of this country or even other parts of the world where they may not even recognize him. So we can't, if we're going to be consistent, then we have to be consistent about both. We have to say, because Chappelle's a millionaire, we're now saying that he's jumped into a different strata, and we're not going to take his jokes the same because he doesn't feel the same because he's powerful now, he's wealthy. Then we can then turn around and say a wealthy white person that doesn't factor in if they decided to come out as LGBT. That we're just going to look at the LGBT aspect of it and not their wealth. It has to be consistency there.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're gonna get to any answers here. I just want to have these discussions because I think there's really no good answer. I think the best answer is just, and Chappelle said this himself, you have to have empathy, and empathy is blind. I do wish that he made a better effort to come out and say in an eloquent way, to convey in a way that he's just making jokes, but that personally that he has no issues with people's choices with them at all. I think he tries to say it, but I feel like he could do much more when he's out there, and I feel like he wouldn't receive as much blowback if he actually focused evenly on other areas as well. Because I do feel that in the last few years, he has focused a lot on the gay and transgender community because that's the one that pushed the hardest against him. So I understand that. But I kind of wish that he wouldn't have done that, because I really enjoy his observations when it comes to relationships between blacks and whites, when it comes to his hypotheticals. I still remember his stand-up comedy where he's wearing that yellow shirt. What is it? It's not Killing Them Softly. The other one, For What It's Worth. Mm-hmm. I remember, if you go back and you listen to his stand-up For What It's Worth, and to this day, that's my favorite. Like, he hasn't been able to match that level. So that to me is still my favorite one. He has a there about the origin of AIDS and about, scientists thinking that it was people having sex with monkeys. And that to me is probably one of my favorite jokes that he gives, and it has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with politics. It's just him coming up with these crazy hypotheticals and talking about them, and it's really goofy. And I wish that he would focus more on that aspect as opposed to being so focused on trying to push back on this community that does have legitimate grievances. They do have a, I mean, they do have a right and a legitimate gripe in saying that they feel offended, that they feel disrespected, because his jokes are offensive and disrespectful, right? So I agree with them in that part. I don't think that we can just come out and say that Chappelle is homophobic and he's out there intentionally trying to punch down on his community. He's trying to do comedy, and the comedy happens to be offensive. And I think if he didn't focus as much on that community and he just distributed more evenly, I think that it may not have generated as much controversy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then the other thing to think about is his race, right? Like he's a black man making those statements, and whether a white comedian making those statements, how would he be treated? Although I guess you can make an argument. No, I mean, there's still a lot of white comedians out there.
It's really hard to pull that off. I do think Chappelle, it helps him that he's black, because he has that card that says, wait a minute, I've experienced a lot of racism and a lot of hurtful discrimination throughout my life. Just the same way that he gets to joke about black people. It probably helps him a bit. Definitely a white comedian trying to pull these jokes, it would probably get even more, it would get more of a backlash.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, I think we can wrap it up there. I think I've said what I wanted to say. Hope I don't get into any trouble. Just disclaimer out there that this is just a conversation about the pros and the cons. We definitely don't support any type of violence against any type of group, even if it's violence against white people. Definitely don't go out there and do anything stupid.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to encourage people to make peace, make love, not war.
Very well said, Herreo.
All right, then. If you all out there enjoy our content, make sure to check us out. We are Brown Perspective. Estamos on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Are we on Facebook now?
Still not on Facebook.
All right. Maybe that's for the better.
We're waiting until they change their practices.
That's right. Okay. Nos vemos.
Ciao.